All right, welcome everyone. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is August 2nd, and this is a meeting of the Metropolitan Water District Representatives Caucus and a special meeting of the Board of Directors of West Basin Municipal Water District. And with that, I would like to ask our General Manager if you could please determine if we have a quorum.
Happy to do that, President Houston. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Director Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Harold Williams.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez. And President Scott Houston.
Here. All right, so we have 4 out of 5 present, so we'll move forward. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak?
President Houston, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both virtually and in person. If there's anybody on our virtual platform that would like to make public comment, please let us know by raising your virtual hand. I do not see anybody. I'll check the room. And I don't see anybody requesting public comment here.
Very good. Thank you, EJ. And I will just briefly ask if those who are in the room don't mind introducing yourself. There's just a handful of us here. So, so with that, let's start with EJ and we'll work our way this direction.
EJ Caldwell, General Manager of West Basin Municipal Water District.
Okay, Desiree Quintero, Board Secretary. Tammy Hurley-High with West Basin.
Rob Catherman, WRD.
Christy Colby, California Water Service. Gabby Myers, California Water Service.
Charles Gale, Metropolitan Water District.
Gus Meza with West Basin.
Very good, thank you. And I know there's a number of people on the line. I'm not going to ask them all to go down by themselves. I don't know if there were any other elected folks on here. EJ, I don't see any other directors.
We do have Director Russ Lefebvre.
Oh, I missed that. I'm so sorry. Russ,
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Yes, you are there. I see your name as I scroll down. Okay, so welcome, Director Lefebvre.
This is my ticket.
I don't see any other for elected, but thank you everyone who has joined us here and online. And with that, we will go ahead and move into this agenda. Our item 4, discussion items, 4A, federal legislative update. If EJ could introduce that item.
Yes, thank you very much, President Houston. I'm actually very excited because we have 2 speakers from Metropolitan Water District who have not been here with us at our MWD caucus in the past. As you know, Metropolitan Water District has a long history of outstanding professionals representing not just Metropolitan Water District, but its member agencies both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. And today we have the principal representatives with us today. So the first presentation is item 4A. It's a federal legislative update by Abby Schneider, the executive legislative representative for Metropolitan Water District.
Thank you for having me. And I must say, you told me I didn't need slides, so it looks like J's are up there and you're just going to have to listen to me talk, but I really appreciate the opportunity to provide the federal update. Congress adjourned on July 28th, and both chambers are enjoying a nice summer break or district work period, as they call it. I hope that you all have plans to meet with your representatives or senators during the month of August. The Senate doesn't return to DC until September 5th, and the House does not reconvene until September 12th. Lawmakers need their rest because September is going to be a very busy month. The federal fiscal year ends on September 30th, and all 12 appropriation bills funding government programs need to be enacted or the government will shut down. Congress passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, or FRA, in June. This bill established top-line spending numbers for both the FY24 and FY25 appropriations process. Passage of the bill was supposed to clear the way for quick enactment of the FY24 appropriations bills. However, it hasn't quite worked out that way. First, House lawmakers decided the FRA numbers were a ceiling and not a floor, and crafted appropriations bills at or below FY22 numbers. Then in July, the Senate Appropriations Committee got in on the action And it seems the Senate too views the FRA language as more suggestion than a commitment. And while the House went low, the Senate went high. The upper chamber's appropriators added $8 billion in defense spending and $5.7 billion in non-defense spending to the top line numbers agreed to in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Although the senators would tell you they kept to the deal in the FRA and the additional funding is for emergency purposes only and is in keeping with the deal that was struck on the Senate floor prior to passage of the FRA. The stark difference between the two chambers can be seen in their proposed funding for the Environmental Protection Agency. The House cut EPA's total budget by 39%, and the Senate kept it flat, consistent with the FRA deal. The House bill in particular decimates yearly funding for EPA's state revolving program, cutting funding for clean water projects by 67% and drinking water projects by 59%. I'm not ringing alarm bells on the SRF cuts just yet for a couple of reasons. First, both the drinking water and clean water SRF program are set to receive $2.4 billion in FY24 funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, and that's more funding than either program ever receives through the yearly appropriations process. Even if the House cuts are enacted, the program would receive record funding in FY24. Secondly, lawmakers actually like the SRF program, so I'm not worried it's on a path to be eliminated. The SRF program is a vehicle for funding community-directed projects or earmarks, and California comes out ahead in this funding model. The state receives more SRF funding with earmarks than without. As you can probably tell from my report, though, the House and Senate remain far apart on FY24 appropriations levels, and with the end of the fiscal year approaching, there's a real chance the government will shut down in October. So September could be quite a contentious month when lawmakers finally return to DC. However, it's not all doom and gloom in DC. Despite the House cutting EPA water funding, there is a bit of good news to report. And while I don't want to delve into particular programmatic funding levels because we're still a long way off, it's important to keep in mind that the lawmakers do not disagree over Bureau of Reclamation funding. The House and the Senate appropriations bills that fund the Bureau of Reclamation are largely identical and completely consistent with the president's request. So while they like to fight over EPA, they are committed to funding Western water programs in the Bureau of Reclamation. Federal legislation takes much longer to be enacted into law than state legislation, and just getting a hearing on a bill is a pretty big deal. And to that end, I'm pleased to report the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water and Power held its first legislative hearing of the 118th Congress on July 19th. The hearing served two purposes. First, to provide oversight on Reclamation's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act programs, and second, to receive testimony on 16 bills. At just over an hour in length, the hearing barely touched either topic. Senators from both parties lauded Commissioner Tooten's work on the Colorado River and elsewhere in the West. They praised her willingness to visit their states and engage with their constituents, and appreciated the fact that she is well versed in their local issues. Senator Padilla testified at the hearing in support of his recently introduced bill, S-2166, authorizing a new reclamation program to fund voluntary multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing project. Senator Feinstein's Canal Conveyance Capacity Restoration Act, S-2161, and Stream Act, S-2162, were also considered at the hearing. Metropolitan supports all three of these bills. Commissioner Tooten offered technical feedback on all three bills and is going to work with the senators to address Reclamation's concerns. It remains to be seen if the bills will come any closer to enactment this Congress. Going to give you a little bit of a PFAS update next. In late June, the chair and ranking member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Carper and Senator Capito, reached an agreement on a PFAS bill and released draft legislation for public comment. The comment period on the draft bill was originally only going to be open until July 3rd, but the deadline was extended until July 14th. The senators were hoping to move the bill through committee before the August recess. However, over 350 comment letters were submitted on the draft bill, and committee consideration of the bill was delayed until the fall in order to allow more time to take into account all the comments they received and revise the legislation. The draft bill does not include CERCLA liability protections for water systems. Without this protection, drinking water, wastewater, and recycled water facilities could be held responsible for cleaning up PFAS, even though we didn't manufacture or distribute these chemicals. It's not too late to request this to be added to the bill. Metropolitan wrote a letter requesting water systems be protected from liability under CERCLA on July 28th, and we are asking our member agencies to do the same. The National Water Associations released a report entitled Correcting PFAS Myths, Misperceptions Risk Higher Cleanup Costs for Water Ratepayers on July 19th and conducted Hill visits in July to emphasize that including an exemption for water systems in the Senate legislation does not undermine the polluter pay principle and will protect ratepayers from higher water bills. I will keep you updated on committee consideration of the bill when the Senate returns to session in September. I have one personnel update before concluding my DC report, and that's Michael Brain was named Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior on July 19th. Prior to his appointment, he was Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. And before that, he served as a staff member on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. If you came to DC to talk about an Army Corps issue or an issue with the Clean Water Act or the rulemaking called Waters of the United States, you probably met with Michael Brain. Mr. Brain succeeds Tanya Trujillo, who resigned from the Department of Interior on July 27th. Over at EPA, Mei Wu was named Deputy Assistant Administrator in EPA's Office of Water on June 5th. Prior to this appointment, Ms. Wu served as Deputy Undersecretary of Marketing and Regulatory Programs at the Department of Agriculture. Prior to joining USDA, you may remember Ms. Wu because she was the Senior Director at the Natural Resource Defense Council, where she worked on drinking water issues. She has testified before Congress on EPA's lead and copper rule and other proposed drinking water standards. This concludes the federal update, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Abby. You said it was a slow time at the moment, but then look at that. A lot of stuff going on, especially in our universe of waters. So thank you for that. Any questions from anybody here in the room or online for Abby? And if you want to from online, you can raise your hand or chime in. Anybody? Well, hold on, Matt Bay. There we go. I see your hand now. Matt, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, President Houston. And thank you, Abby, for being here today. I just had a question for you on the PFAS. Metropolitan shared your letters to the senators with us, I think earlier this week or last week. And it spoke to seeking out exemptions for drinking water and wastewater systems. And I know you mentioned recycled water, so I just wanted to make sure that that is going to be part of the conversations that Metropolitan is having. I know with the pure water facility that,
100%. That's exactly what we lead with, that's our big initiative. Congress, you created this program. Now you can't prevent, please help us so we can use it and not have that liability. So yes, great. And the language that we support is broad enough that it covers recycled water protections. It's the way it's worded. I'm confident we're protected.
Great. Thank you, Abby.
Good. Abby, what about the Colorado River negotiations? Can you give us any sort of highlight of where that's at this moment?
Well, hopefully not in Congress and no longer with the 6 states beating up on California. It's sort of my role on it. They have scoping comments due on the SEIS process on October 15th that you will hear about. And we're hoping for everyone's sake that all 7 states will agree on what reclamation should consider going forward at a very high level. As Metropolitan, we do a lot of education to our delegation. And in fact, when Congress returns in September, although for scheduling reasons, it's likely to slip till October, we work with the CRB, the Colorado River Board of California, to do educational briefings for congressional staff. So we will have our next one in the fall. And we're really, from a congressional perspective, the message from our delegation is really clear. They're there to protect us, but really encourage us to work as much as possible with the other states.
Good, thank you. Anyone else? Let's check through here. Okay, Abby, I think that's it for you, and we really appreciate it. So with that, I will go back to EJ Caldwell. If you could move us into item B, the B portion of this.
Yes, thank you very much. Item 4B is our state legislative update. For that presentation, we have Jay Jefferson, the Executive Legislative Representative for Metropolitan Water District. And thank you very much, Jay, for joining us. As you know, Jay just joined Metropolitan Water District earlier this year. So we're excited to have him here today.
Thank you. Appreciate the welcome, and good afternoon. Great to meet you all.
Good afternoon.
Right, and so starting with this first slide, and so as he noted, my name is Jay Jefferson. I'm the new Executive Legislative Representative on the state side for Metropolitan, and so I'd like to take this time to provide you all with a legislative update, and I'll start with our legislative calendar to give you an overview of where things are at. And so on June 15th, that was the deadline for the legislature to pass the state budget. And so that budget was passed by a majority vote and was signed into law by the governor on June 27th. And then July 14th was the last day for policy committees to meet, where any bill that didn't meet this deadline would become a 2-year bill unless it receives a rule waiver that allows it to be heard outside of the policy committee deadlines. And so also beginning July 14th, the legislature went into a summer recess. And so from July 14th to August 14th, there will be no votes taken in committee or on the floor, and session is going to be reconvening Monday, August 14th. And so once we return on August 14th, the legislature will be in its final month of session for the year, with session finally adjourning on September 14th. Next slide, please. And so now turning to some recent budget and bond activity in the legislature. And so taking it back a bit, on May 12th, the governor released his May revised budget proposal with a total spending plan of $306.5 billion. And at that time, they were projecting a deficit of $31.5 billion. And so after the governor presents his budget proposal, there's a bit of back and forth through negotiations with the legislature, and eventually they finally passed and authorized a budget with a $310.8 billion spending plan. And so this budget covers the deficit by cutting about $8 billion in spending while delaying and shifting some other expenses to other funds. And so this spending plan is going to borrow $6.1 billion, and they're going to be setting aside $37.8 billion in total reserves, which is the largest reserve amount in the state's history. And now looking to our $50 million budget request. And so Metropolitan is advancing a budget request for $50 million to support projects that are being developed to move additional water resources to our state water project dependent areas. And so any opportunities for funding and receiving these funds will either come through future trailer bill activity after the recess, or possibly through the climate bond proposals. And so now shifting to the climate bonds. And so at our June meeting, Metropolitan's Board of Directors approved 4 key priorities in the climate bonds. And so these include $1.8 billion for recycled water projects, $850 million for dam safety, $500 million for regional conveyance, and $250 million for urban water use efficiency. And so we believe that these priorities will allow us to complement our budget requests while seeking much needed resources for other key priorities. And so and just for context, both of these proposals, SB 867 and AB 1567, they both deal with climate bonds. They have different provisions, but their total spending amount is about the same, around $15.5 billion. And so currently, between the governor and legislative leaders, they're working out negotiations on what's going to be the final priorities for these bond proposals. And now turning to the infrastructure streamlining package. And so on May 19th, the governor signed an executive order to initiate a pathway to accelerate clean infrastructure projects. And that was accompanied by 10 proposed budget trailer bills. And so this infrastructure package was intended to streamline permitting and speed up construction to reduce timing and costs, to expedite judicial and administrative review without reducing environmental protections and transparency protections, as well as using this to maximize federal dollars for climate projects that address pollution and benefit low-income and disadvantaged communities. And so the legislature held informational hearings on these proposals, and through negotiations, developed a final package that was signed into law on July 10th. And so the efforts and outcomes of this package are officially state law. And so this package included a number of different proposals, but specific to the water community, the bills of interest that we reviewed at Metropolitan included SB 124. This bill is going to allow the Department of Water Resources to develop green financing programs using Federal Inflation Reduction Act funding. Then there's SB 146. This is going to provide progressive design build authority for the Department of Water Resources, which will reduce project costs and hopefully allow them to expedite project completion. And then SB 147, this is going to give project proponents an opportunity to have incidental take of fully protected species. And then SB 149, this proposal is going to streamline document preparation relating to CEQA administrative records, and it'll also streamline the process for CEQA judicial review. And then lastly, SB 150 deals with equity and workforce development. And so Metropolitan supported this package overall, while noting the need for additional modifications as we move forward with implementation. Next slide, please. So there's a number of different legislative proposals I'll cover here. And so AB 399, the content of this bill may be familiar. This was previously AB 530, and the contents of that bill were moved into AB 399. And so this bill amends the County Water Authority Act and is sponsored by the City of San Diego. And so currently, in order to secede from a county water agency, existing law requires a vote of the electors in the jurisdiction of the seceding local agency. This bill is going to require majority votes by both the voters in the seceding local agency and the voters within the region of the broader county water authority before a detachment from the territory is approved. And so this bill had its first hearing in Senate Governance and Finance, which it passed out. The bill is non-fiscal, and so it's currently on the Senate floor. And of note, this bill also has an urgency clause in it, and so it would take effect immediately if signed into law. Metropolitan does not have a position on this bill, but will continue to monitor its progress as it moves forward. And then AB 5072, this is Metropolitan's co-sponsored bill, which is going to prohibit the use of potable water to irrigate non-functional turf on commercial, industrial, and institutional properties. This bill passed out of the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee on July 3rd and is currently in Senate Appropriations. And then AB 1573, this is Assemblymember Friedman's other turf bill. It's going to prohibit the use of non-functional turf in new or renovated non-residential areas and require that at least 25% of the plants be native by 2026. And so of note here, this bill was amended. Initially, it required a maximum of 75% native plants, but now the bill only requires going up to 25%. But in the process, they're going to be establishing a working group that has the charge of developing recommendations for implementing a 75% native plant requirement in the future. And this bill was heard at the same time as 1572 and is also in the Senate Appropriations Committee. Next slide, please. And so now moving into water rights, we know there's been a lot of discussion around water rights. And so hopefully the updates here present some welcome news. And so AB 460, this was a Bauer-Cahan bill that was going to authorize the State Water Board to issue an interim relief order to a diverter or user of water to prohibit illegal diversions. And so this bill was widely opposed by water agencies and the agricultural community due to concerns around lack of judicial review and due process, in addition to the expanded scope of the Water Board. And so this bill was pulled from its committee hearing by the author and is now a 2-year bill. AB 1337, this is the Wicks bill that would have authorized the State Water Board to issue a curtailment order for any diversion for any water rights holder when water is not available under the diverter's right of priority, and issue a cease and desist order when that right holder fails to curtail their diversions. And this bill was also pulled from its committee hearing by the author and is now a 2-year bill. And then SB 389. And so this bill by Senator Allen authorizes the State Water Board to investigate the diversions and use of water of any water rights holder to determine whether their diversions and use of water are within the scope of their rights. And so Metropolitan believes that the State Water Board should have the appropriate authority to better assess water rights. And so with that, we are working with the author's office to ensure that the legislation is written in a way that provides water right holders with the appropriate protections when they're responding to a water board investigation. And so this, out of the 3 bills, this is the only one still moving forward. And this bill is currently in Assembly Appropriations Committee. Next slide, please. And so this concludes my presentation. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide you with the update. And at this time, happy to answer any questions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jay, and welcome aboard. And thank you for taking time to be here at our caucus meeting. And I'm going to open it up. I mean, there was a lot of material here that's happened and things when these folks return to Sacramento. So does anybody have a question or comment at this time, whether here in the room or online? Shy. I see a hand. Russ, Director LaFave.
I knew it was Russ.
Yep, okay. Director LaFave, go ahead. Oh, now you're on mute. You're on mute, Russ. All right, well, we'll see in a sec if we can get him, but in the interim, Jay, I'll ask you a question. I did see, you were talking about those bond measures. And I know there's a lot of discussion because there could be a lot of different bond measures going through the paces, but
Sorry,
you
I
have an
didn't turn
idea?
my mic on.
oh, okay.
I'll wait.
I mean,
I'll wait.
ask, okay, great. I'll ask the question first and then we'll let you go. But Jay, have they made any thought yet? Are we looking at something in March, the primary, or are we looking to November, the general?
Yeah, so fair question. Both of the climate bond proposals were amended for the March ballot. And so currently that's the timeline we're expecting to operate under. But as I noted, or at least I touched on this before, both of these bills were initially set for a policy committee hearing towards the middle of July, but they were both pulled back from being heard in committee. And so the expectation is that there's going to be some significant amendments coming in, once we come back from session from this break. And so when we return and those amendments have been negotiated, it could change the timeline, but as of now, it's set for March.
Okay. Very good. And yeah, again, I saw recently there's a lot of potential bond measures going through the paces, and I suppose the governor and the legislators will determine what they may or may not want to move forward on, let alone is it a crowded March ballot or you wait till November and everything happening. So a lot to look forward to, I guess, right, Jay?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I don't know how much we look forward to some of that, but anyways, Russ, go ahead, Director LeVay.
Thanks. Thanks, Jay. I don't understand AB 399, I guess. My understanding initially was that the purpose was of that piece of legislation was to make it a lot more difficult for two agencies to leave the San Diego County Water Authority. I thought that had already happened, that the approval of those agencies leaving had happened. What's the purpose of 399, or I'm obviously missing something?
Yeah, fair question. And so just to clarify, so it basically would change the voting threshold. Right now, only the voters in the local seceding agency have to cast a vote on whether they want to secede from the county water authority. But under this bill, they basically have to hold two elections. So one election with their own local voters, and then another election that includes the entire voting share of the water of the county. And so yes, LAFCO did approve the separation, and so now it's going to go to a public vote. But my understanding is that because this legislation has an urgency clause in it, which means it takes effect immediately, if that vote does not take place this year, then basically the urgency clause, theoretically, if the bill passes and is signed, the urgency clause would take effect and then shape the requirements for that election.
That still sounds like it's locking the barn door after the horse is gone. I don't quite get how that can possibly work.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And, as I noted, Metropolitan, we don't have a position on this. We're just
Right.
monitoring it, but we'll certainly defer to, our colleagues at San Diego County for additional input.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you, Russ. Very good question. And Jay mentioned something about if they had an election sometime this year, unless the urgency clause comes into effect, they would be moving in that direction already, right, Jay?
Yeah, so like my understanding is that if they had an election before this bill were to take effect, then it wouldn't impact the vote. But because it's an urgency clause and it takes effect immediately, if they're set to take a vote on this sometime later, and this becomes the law of the land, that now changes the vote threshold.
Okay, got it. It's already August, so I would assume if they were going to have an election this year in November or what have you, and it's an odd year, right? So they would probably they'd almost have to have their stuff together right now, wouldn't they?
Yeah, right.
So there you go, Russ. I think, it's up in the air as to two powers, what's going to happen just yet, right? Any other questions? All right, hold on one second, Jay. We have Director Rob Catherman of the Water Replenishment District here with us. Go ahead, Director Catherman.
Yeah. Jay, thank you for your excellent presentation. Our board sent a letter of support for Senator Allen's bill 389 as amended. My question is, are you guys now supporting the amended version?
So we've been working with the author's office to address some amendment concerns that they seem pretty open to, and we've had really productive conversations with their staff. But currently in the bill, it allows the water board to direct their investigative orders to diverters and users of water who may not be the water right holder. And so our concern there is that we believe that the water rights holder should have the opportunity to defend their own water right claim, because that's what this bill is all about, is investigating the use of water to validate their claim to their water rights. And so our concern is, if the water board is directing those investigations to diverters or users who are not the water rights holder, and those parties respond on behalf of the water rights holder, it could present conflicting information or undermine the water right claim, instead of giving the water right holder the opportunity to effectively defend their own claim. And so our amendment request is basically to ensure that insofar as these investigations impact water rights, that it's the water right holder who squarely has the opportunity to defend their own claim.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, and as I noted, we've had multiple discussions with their staff, and so we're hoping to see subsequent amendments come once we return from the break.
We'll stay tuned.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jay, on that one. Other questions or comments? I have one or two for you, Jay, because I'm still trying to make sure I completely understand the two Friedman bills. I think, Matt, I think that's you, right? Give me a minute, Matt, okay? On the two Laura Friedman bills, Jay, if you could just remind us, so the first one's non-functional turf, what exactly that means, potable water on non-functional turf. And then secondly, on the landscape design model ordinance, and maybe you can answer this one first. So obviously, when they say native plants, that's different in Northern California areas versus Southern California, et cetera. But this applies across the state, assuming it goes through. Does that mean that they have to dictate plant palettes in different parts of the California to be in compliance?
Yeah, that basically is it. So it would be, in addition to being native, they'd have to be regionally appropriate. And so, yes, there's in the bill, they create a registry where it lists the plants that are appropriate based on different climate and different regions. And so that would be the source that landscapers or developers would go to find the right plants to comply.
Okay, and this is for, you said, was it new development or what was it?
Yeah, so it's only new developments or where you're doing renovations.
Or renovation, okay.
Yeah, and so the kind of key difference is that 1572 would apply to all existing properties, where 1573 is kind of a going forward measure.
Okay, so then back to 1572, which is the potable water for non-functional turf. And so basically, if you have potable water, well, why don't you explain it to us in layperson's terms? What exactly this means again?
Sure. So basically, they wouldn't allow you to use drinking water to irrigate grass that isn't being used for any human purposes. So it's more like cosmetic grass that's purely there just to serve an aesthetic purpose, but it isn't used by people. It's not frequented by any of the local residents or customers. And so they have a definition of functional and non-functional turf. And the goal really was to make it so that it's clear that non-functional turf only refers to turf where it's not being used for recreational or human purposes.
Okay, and then, yeah, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, yeah, we've heard a lot of concerns about the turf conversion requirements in the bill, but a lot of the concerns we heard were people feeling like this would impact their family life. You know, their children wouldn't be able to play in the grass, et cetera. But in those cases, that turf is considered functional. So if people are using it, it's considered functional. But if it's purely aesthetic, then it's non-functional.
Okay. And what it also means is, how does it work? Can they water when there's not restrictions, but when there's restrictions, you know, they cannot water, or is it just, it doesn't even matter? Restrictions or no restriction?
Yeah, so it would be a complete ban on the use of drinking water. However, if a community had access to recycled water, they could use recycled water instead of drinking water.
Basically, if you don't have recycled water, you just can't water this grass, period.
Right.
No matter if you got a good water supply year or not.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the requirement in the bill. Yeah.
Okay.
And the goal is
then,
conservation.
I'm sorry, what was that?
No, I was just going to say, the goal is conservation and, Metropolitan. We've moved, with the support of our partners like yourselves, have been able to move pretty successful rebate programs. And so we think there are some mechanisms in place that will allow folks to get credits and rebates to help reduce the cost of this while also conserving water.
Okay. And one last question for me on this. So this applies statewide as well, right?
Yes.
Places way up in the middle of nowhere, Northern California, are not going to be able to water grass, just like those of us who live in the desert.
Yeah, there are some specific requirements though. So like, for example, they refer to, I want to say it's 5,000 square feet of common area. It won't include single family residential properties or really most residential properties unless they are under a homeowners association or a community service organization. So it really does narrowly focus on commercial, industrial, and institutional properties, and is less so focused on the residential space.
Okay, got it. Okay. Good to know. I mean, I remember when we were going through all this discussion here at West Basin of places that I don't think we all knew the weeds of it, and it's it is what it is, but it's interesting to see how it could impact our state. One second, I have a question in the room, but also Matt was online first, so Matt Bay, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, President Houston. Jay, you talked about the water bonds and how they're both, I think, in the $15 to $16 billion range. And I think that's higher than any bond that's ever passed before in California, certainly for climate and water. So I'm just curious kind of maybe what you're hearing on if they expect the final version of those, which will include more than just water programs to drop down to lower, maybe to what we've seen in the past of 10 billion or thereabouts. And based on that, I guess, what is Metropolitan really kind of trying to target or prioritize in those bonds? I know you mentioned a few different things, but could you kind of talk about if the numbers change, what are you going to kind of be focusing on for the water bond?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Matt. So, one thing we're hearing is, yes, the 15.5 billion in these two climate bond proposals is a lot of money. And so this is all hearsay. None of this is certain, but our understanding is that across all of these different bond proposals, because you've got the climate bond, you've got a higher education bond, you've got a mental health bond, a housing bond. So you have a number of different bond proposals. And across these different proposals, the governor, what I've heard is that he's open to around 25 billion for all of them. And so with that in mind, the dollar amount for the climate bonds would have to come down significantly. And so rather than weigh in on what should be in or out of the climate bonds, the way we've approached it is mainly to push on what we think the priority should be. And so that's where we get to our 4 categories, with the 1.8 billion for recycled water really being one of our top priorities, in addition to the additional funding for regional conveyance.
Very good, thank you. We have a question from an audience member in the room. You can go ahead and state your name again so Jay can hear you.
Hi, Jay, Christy Colby. I just wanted to know on 1572 what the enforcement mechanism was going to be.
Yeah, so 1572 is a little different than 1573 in that it basically puts it on the locals to adopt ordinances and regulations to implement the requirements of the bill. However, enforcement is permissive. And so in theory, an ordinance is adopted establishing these requirements. The local county, city, or water agency doesn't necessarily have to enforce the requirements. The enforcement side of it rests with the state water board, but it does give locals the ability to adopt their own enforcement. And so I imagine that the way this will play out, some locals will adopt enforcement ordinances, others may want to stay out of that. And insofar as locals stay out of the enforcement, it'll be up to the state water board.
Thank you.
Okay, any final questions or comments? And I don't see any further anything.
No, thank you.
And I want to say, Jay, thank you very much, let alone, you really nailed it and hit it out of the park because, you could keep up with all of our questions. I mean, these are complex subjects and you didn't miss a beat. So welcome to Metropolitan. Thank you for your expertise. We're definitely going to look forward to hearing more from you the next coming months and years. And I know, of course, our team here at West Basin is really well versed on these as well. And so appreciate your partnership. With that, we'll move into director's comments or future agenda items, if there are any. So I open the floor to my colleagues, Director Deere or Director Williams. Any final? No comments from Director Deere.
No, thank you.
Nothing from Director Williams. Director Gray. Director Gray. Okay. So with that, I have nothing else either. I have to say this was a really, really good meeting, productive meeting. I'm glad we were able to hold it. I know it's the midst of summer, everyone, but we appreciate your participation. And the next scheduled meeting we have here is for September 6th, 2023. And so with that, we're adjourned.